Hello. Thank you for coming in.
Pleasure.
Back in the mid-70s, when you first began with Japan, why did you actually call the band Japan?
Well, it's the same situation that most bands find themselves in. You're offered your first gig and you realise you don't have a name for the band. Japan was pulled out of the hat. None of us really liked the name. We all thought, well, it'll do for one night, we'll change it later. And we never got around to changing it. We knew nothing about the country or the culture. It was really just an image, a vague image. It meant something different to each of us, I think.
And it also probably caused some sort of confusion to people on this side of the world as to who was this band with this name that certainly didn't look Japanese.
Yeah.
Yeah, I suppose it actually helped you in Japan.
Well, it was a strange beginning because, first of all, we couldn't get a record deal in Japan. They refused to release the record because they said, well, nobody's going to be interested in an English band called Japan, you know. And finally, they were persuaded to release the record. I think there was a mixture of feelings from the public. You know, some people wasn't sure what to expect. Other people picked up on it immediately. But it was the first country we were successful in, I suppose. So it did, I suppose, have some beneficial influence on the public. But I think basically we were popular in Japan because of the image of the band. I mean, it was quite a striking image at that point in time. And generally in Japan you sell records through magazines, not through airplay or TV shows. It's the magazines have the major influence there. So if you have a strong image, you're going to sell records. It's as simple as that, basically.
And being photogenic helps.
It helps.
That's right. Is it true that all the members in the band had no prior musical training?
No, none of us had any training at all.
That's pretty extraordinary because you managed to become very inventive and certainly very skilled musicians in a very short space of time.
Yeah, skilled to a degree, but the fact that we had no training, I think, left us more scope to find ourselves within, well, especially the rest of the band, find their own characters, their own styles within the instruments themselves. I think when you are taught, you tend to begin to feel confined at some point by the technique you're learning. I don't think they ever felt inhibited in that way. I think they began to discover their own particular styles relatively early on in time. So I think it was quite a positive thing. And the fact that we were growing and learning together was very interesting. I mean, we made a lot of mistakes in public, the first two albums being good examples of that. But I wouldn't change anything now. I mean, it was a great education, great learning period working with Japan.
And you're still working with certainly two of the members now.
I've been working with Steve and Rich have been working on my projects. I've been working with Mick on his album. So I mean, we keep in touch. You know, there's still a crossover happening.
Would it surprise you if I said to you in the 2 years that I've been presenting this program that I've had many more letters to requests to see you and Japan than any other band?
Yes, it's
truly,
surprising.
Yes.
Yeah.
And I still now all the time, which is interesting, mostly from fairly young viewers, I guess, which is really nice. But you've never come to this country with Japan. Why did you never think of touring here when you were so close, when you were in Japan itself?
I suppose one is the financial reasons. The reason we used to go to Japan quite often was because, despite the fact that we found the place very interesting, it was our financial support for many years. It was the only country we were selling records in. And we had to go back there at least once a year to tour to make money so that we could continue doing the kind of things we wanted to do. And actually just surviving, paying the rent, you know, it was that simple. I guess, for me anyway, you tend to need a focal point to visit a country. I mean, if you decide to go somewhere, there has to be a reason to go there. There has to be something that attracts you about the place. It's only relatively recently that I found something here that made me want to come here and visit the place.
And what's that?
It's an interest in the music of the Aborigines, I think.
I thought you'd say that.
There's a project I'm thinking of taking on that could benefit from my learning a little something about the Aborigines' way of life, traditional way of life, and the music.
So are you planning to go to Central Australia? I
wanted to, haven't had time. But I think if I do record the project I'm thinking of, I'll record some of it here and hopefully get the time to visit some areas I wanted to visit.
You obviously are affected by other cultures, Africa and Asia.
Mm.
How important is travel to you?
Travel used to be very important to me. You can be filled with ideas, very vague ideas for material, for whatever, but you tend to have trouble bringing them to the surface, bringing them into some kind of form. And travel used to just tip the scale slightly. It used to bring out the ideas in a more concrete form, if you like. Through the experience of travelling, through visiting places or whatever, they could suddenly stimulate the idea and bring it to light, and clarify the whole thing in your mind. So I used to travel a lot because of that, basically. I haven't travelled much in the past 2 years because I've been in the studio or writing material, and I haven't felt such a need to travel. I found there's a source within me now that I can tap more readily. I think that's because I'm working on material and in an area that's very close to my heart, and it's very natural for me to write now. It's not something I have to work at. So I'm very happy with that. I mean, it's nice to be able to be in your own environment, and I mean, it's my most prolific period, so it says something about my frame of mind at this point in time.
Mm. So you are now becoming a more spontaneous writer?
I think so, yeah. Still, there's a...
It must be wonderful to be able to tap exactly
Yes.
what you feel and to be able to put it down.
Well, yes, I understand what I'm aiming towards a lot more than I used to. I mean, everything's a lot clearer now. Things seem to work in a very logical way now. Still, the writing process is very slow. I mean, from the very beginning, the beginning of a song tends to be a phrase that comes to mind, accompanied by some kind of atmosphere or emotional feeling, something of some kind. And then I can leave that in my mind to mature, if you like, for anything from a week, 2 weeks to months, 3 or 4 months, before actually sitting down in front of a piano with a guitar to actually try and put it into some kind of musical framework. So the process is still very slow, but I understand it now. I understand the process. I understand really what I'm looking for. When I get the original idea, I can understand where it's heading and a reason for creating it. Well, when I was younger, I worked kind of a lot more on instinct without the intellectual side of the understanding of what I was aiming towards.
I think it really does show, actually. It seems to me now that it's very important to you that you communicate to the listener what you're feeling.
It's become more and more important. I found with Japan towards the end, too much of the valuable content, or what I felt was the valuable content of both lyrics and music, was buried beneath imagery, too much imagery. And you could say the visual image got in the way as well, because I think people tend to stop at the image, either of the band or of the music. They don't tend to look any deeper because it's enough for them. It's very easy. It makes life very easy for people if they've got something there presented for them in a kind of package. They don't have to do too much work to enjoy that music. If it's made a little more difficult for them, people either lose interest, or those that don't lose interest and decide to take it that much further find the experience that much more rewarding. And what I've tried to do is break down those barriers between artist and audience, which can be just, first of all, the very simple fact of the visual image. And then the imagery within the music, within the lyrics, I've broken that imagery down. I try to write on a very basic level. I don't write about personal experiences so much as the emotions and thoughts that accompany the experience, so that there's a kind of universal quality to the lyrics. People don't relate it directly to me and think, oh, that's what I've been through. I hope people can relate it to their own lives. So I think that's very important. And musically, I've broken down the decoration that you tend to find a great deal of in pop music. Because pop music is basically trying to capture the listener's attention in the shortest span of time possible. And there is a lot of superfluous melodies or whatever, decoration, generally in pop music because of that. And so it's been a slow process of trying to break all those elements down, and can be very difficult to be very objective about that at times.
I think, yes, obviously, you've gone from writing somewhat obscure lyrics to something which is much more explicit. I think it's probably why Ghost was so very popular, successful, is because it's something that everyone could really identify with.
Yeah, I think so. I think that was the first time I managed to write a more honest lyric, if you like. Also, the framework of the song allowed me a lot of freedom. Working within the kind of classical ballad form allowed me a great deal of freedom, because everybody knows roughly how that form works. You know, everybody knows verse, bridge, chorus. And if you work within a very simple form like that, you can take a lot more liberties with the arrangement of the piece of music, because you can take all the pillars of support, but people still recognize the outline of the form. I think that was another reason why it was successful. People could still recognize the ballad within the arrangement.
Well, you have a new double album, Gone to Earth. Let's start with the very visual instrumental album. Is it important to you that the listener imagines a picture when listening to a piece, for example, sunlight through towering trees?
It does. I really did that for people that find it difficult to listen to that kind of music. I think the majority of people find it difficult to understand that kind of music at this point in time, and I tried to make it as easy as possible for them to find a way into understanding it. I got the idea from reading about Picasso when he first started painting Cubist paintings. He said to make it easy for the viewers, he gave the pictures very matter-of-fact titles so that they could actually see something within the picture. By just looking at the title, they could look at the picture and begin to make out the outline of what they're seeing. And therefore, they could find a way into the painting that much easier. And basically, I've just adopted the same attitude towards the music. Giving a very visual title, people will immediately have a picture in their mind almost before they start listening to the music. And then from that point onwards, it becomes very easy to enjoy the music, I think. I'm not saying that people have to really go by, be guided by the titles. I think it's quite possible. I mean, I prefer it generally if people just listen to it and conjure up their own images. And that, as I said, it's very important for me that people personalise my music, that it becomes involved in their lives, that it doesn't remain outside of an external thing and a kind of entertainment. I think it's very important that music be personalised, because only in that way will it be of value, will it have a long life, and will it take on a life of its own.
It's also an unexpected album because it's showing another side to you.
Well, it's something I wanted to do for a long time. I released an EP earlier, at the end of '85, called Words with the Shaman. I don't think it was released here,
No,
but
I did not.
it was my first venture into instrumental music, and it gave me a lot of pleasure working in that area. It's very different from writing instrumental compositions as it is writing songs. And they tend to fuel one another. When I'm working on the instrumental material, I have more ideas for vocal material and vice versa. So it's very productive. You know.
So to write a song where the railroad meets the sea, do you actually go to an area like that?
Oh no. With instrumentals, you tend to sit down at an instrument and start playing around, and something will begin to come out of the playing, and you'll find within it a visual picture, if you like, a mood and an atmosphere, and then you begin to enhance that with the arrangement. And when the piece is finished, generally when I've finished recording it in the studio, I will have a very abstract feeling of what that piece is about for me. I try to pin it down in a phrase as close to it as possible, as close to the feeling I have as possible. So the title very rarely comes first in that case.
So the musicians you have used on the album, Steve Jansen and Richard Barbieri, ex-Japan, and also a couple of surprising people. One person I think probably is B.J. Cole. How did you come across...
That was basically Steve Nye's influence. I decided to use pedal steel on Silver Moon, and he suggested B.J. Cole because he'd worked with him before on an earlier project, and he said that B.J. had expressed a desire to work on material that wasn't so obviously geared towards that kind of instrument. He said that instrument had a lot more capabilities than it was given credit for, and he would like to try something that was a bit more experimental. So we thought, yeah, let's give him the chance to try it out. Then,
yes, a great surprise when I read who was on it. And also Robert Fripp and Bill Nelson, two very individual guitarists and very lovely guitarists. So what it was like working with them, and did you particularly choose them?
Yes, well, it tends to be the arrangements that decide who I work with. When I'm working on arranging a piece, suddenly somebody will spring to mind, and that person would just be perfect for the piece. And I've been very fortunate. I just ring them up and ask them if they'd like to do it, and I've been very lucky they say yes. But once I started working with Bill and Robert, first of all, there was the contrast of styles, musical styles, that I thought would be interesting to play with throughout the album. There's a contrast in characters. There's a contrast in methods, in ways of working in the studio. Robert's a very spontaneous player. You tend to have to catch what he plays first take, otherwise you don't get it. It's different next time around. Whereas Bill's a more contemplative kind of player. He will think about what he wants to do. We would talk about it more, and there'll be a lot more suggestions, a lot more give and take working with Bill. And I like the contrast. I like the contrast of working that way with different people. There was never a band in the studio, so I was always working with one person at a time on a very, in a very close way. So there was, so you could concentrate really on what these people were doing. Nothing was really left to chance in that respect.
Are you on a wavelength with those people? Is that very important?
I guess there's a basic set of values, I suppose, that we share in common. I suppose it has to do with the value of life to begin with. And then what we believe the power of music to be, I suppose, the properties of music, the positive properties of music, and the idea of trying to explore new areas in music, I suppose, is common to us all.
This is the first album where you haven't displayed a photograph of yourself on the front. This time it's a piece of art by Russell Mills, which is an interesting connection again, I think, especially since his collaboration with Brian Eno, and and as it is such a visual album,
Yes.
I think it's a very visual album, that you should use a piece of his artwork on the front. How did that come about?
When I was putting together the Japan compilation, Exercising Ghosts, I came across the album cover for Brian Eno's and Harold Budd's The Pearl, and I really liked the cover very much, and Russell did the cover, so I got in touch with him and asked him to do the cover for the compilation, and he did such an excellent job on the cover of that record. I think it's one of his best works. So I thought, well, the next album I do, I'd like Russell to do the cover. As simple as that. Really.
It's really lovely. It works really well. Now, you're also very interested in photography, and you've had one exhibition, or more maybe...
Three.
Three, gosh. Sorry. So are you planning to do more of that sort of thing outside of music?
Not really. Music is really the most important area for me to work in. The photographs came out of a period when I stopped working. I stopped working for about a year and a half after Japan split up. It was when I was really trying to write lyrics of a more honest nature, if you like, what we just spoke about. And it took a long time for me to be able to do that. And so I stopped writing for about a year and a half. And to kind of kill the frustration of not writing, I turned to drawing and painting, which I hadn't done since I was very young. And that gave me a lot of pleasure. And kind of reminded me the kind of enthusiasm and naivety of what it was like when I first started writing songs. And I tried to carry that freshness back to songwriting when I did go back to it. I did that to a degree. And the Polaroids really came out of that period. It kind of just something that wasn't planned. Basically, they were just a scrapbook of ideas. I put a book together, and that's really what I wanted to show, just as a kind of scrapbook of ideas, things that I've been working on. I'm not sure I was justified in having exhibitions, but I'm kind of pleased with the book anyway.
Was there a theme to your photographs?
No, because it was such a pleasure to work on it. They generally happened when I was travelling. And no, there really wasn't a lot of thought behind it. It was just the fun of exploring the area, basically.
Do you think you will come now to Australia with a band?
If I do decide to tour, I will come to Australia, most definitely. But I don't think I'll tour for at least another year, because there's a lot of projects I want to do, writing and recording, and I think that takes precedence over the touring.
So you're already working toward another album?
Yes.
Gosh. Well, it's been positively charming speaking with you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you for coming in.
Pleasure.